more I learned about Bitcoin and exactly how it works, the more I understood that this thing's changing the world and it's the future. Right when you want to enter is like not in the very beginning when this thing is like, in like PhD studies, and not like once you've already experienced all the upside, but kind of in the in-between time when it's just right about to go off, because that's when there's still a lot of upside left, but risk is mitigated. And I kind of feel like that's where we are in Bitcoin right now.
Welcome to the Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hannes Henty.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Path to Wealth. Today we have Towler from Solomon Data Systems. He's a Bitcoin miner, so quite something different than the usual guests. We will talk about, what it entails to actually run a mining company and what brought him there. So welcome to the show, Taylor.
Hey, Johannes, thank you.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and the journey, how you ended up planning to build a Bitcoin mining company, because it's obviously something off the beaten path. And while Bitcoin is in the public more and more, most people don't quite wrap their head around how that even works. Forget about having a mining company. So maybe you can give us a little bit of your background and the journey, how you got here.
Yeah, do it yourself and radical self-reliance are things that I hold as being some of the highest principles in my life. So you can imagine how that led to getting involved with Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. My background is again pretty multidisciplinary as a matter of principle. From a childhood and family standpoint, I'm a third generation industrial maintenance engineer. On the electrical side and mechanical side, I grew up ripping capacitors off motherboards and with a wrench in my hand rebuilding our dirt bikes that we were racing when I was younger. And I always grew up playing video games, so that got me very interested in technology at a young age. Um, Probably my first business was actually getting people inside of massively multiplayer online role-playing games to harvest in-game resources for me on a set schedule that I would buy at a fixed price and then resell. And
Okay.
then that that led to my first job, which was I figured out a way to write scripts for the games that they could play themselves to harvest the in-game resources for me, which I would then sell for real money. So that was kind of like my part-time job throughout school, and my first encountering this notion of letting computers run and make me money. Um, so throughout childhood and my family, we had a variety of family businesses, including fixing industrial equipment, a performance scooter repair shop. I had an event production company when I was younger, which ties into my work as president of the mining conference 2022, which we have coming up in October.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess I've just always kept an open mind to different ways of looking at the world, and following new and emerging technology. And this had me encountering the first time the concept of cryptocurrency and internet money back in 2011, when for me and for everyone else at that point, it was just like a fun thought experiment. Of course, the people
Yeah.
who held all of their 100 bitcoins since 2011 are very wealthy now. I'm not one of those people. I wish I was. Lots of us in the industry these days have that story. Um,
So how many hundreds did you have a decade ago?
oh man, I actually, not Bitcoin specifically, but I had 10 million Litecoin at like a
Yeah.
tenth of a penny each back in 2011. And 18-year-old me thought it was great. I made a few $1,000s on it, bought a car. Life was awesome. Of course, those 10 million Litecoin now are worth like $330 million or something crazy like that. But
And what about your whole range of cars?
yeah, lots of whatever you want.
So then, how did you get involved in the Bitcoin? I mean, I see the natural progression, but so you bought a little bit and you tinkered around with it. But when did you see like the serious potential? I mean, I think like the public immersion where we really from the outside perspective, not being so deep into the computer world, was probably more around like 2016 to 2018 when there were like the first big bounces in the price. But when did you see like a real use case for what is coming?
Yeah, so The thing that gives a currency value is the ability to exchange it for goods and services. That wasn't something that was necessarily true of Bitcoin 2 or 3 years ago, but it's definitely true now. Through using a company called bitrefill.com, you can, be in the checkout line at the grocery store and actually pay for your groceries using Bitcoin. So, when COVID hit, I, had been, working a lot, stored up some capital, and decided to start studying day trading under a friend of mine who is a very, very successful day trader who trades crypto only. And that caused me to dive more into how the core protocol functions, the core Bitcoin protocol, and the social macroeconomics of how that interacts with the world. And I decided that that trading was not the lifestyle for me. However, the more I learned about Bitcoin and exactly how it works, and kind of the history of currency throughout human society and culture, the more I understood that this thing's changing the world and it's the future.
Yeah. So you just touched up on something. You consider Bitcoin to be money or an asset? Because the SEC is still not clear about how they kind of go about it. What's your personal take on it? Where would you kind of put it in which box? Because if you listen to people like Michael Saylor, he considers it software and more an asset than actually a monetary tool like the US dollar.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that it is a means of exchanging wealth. That's always what it was designed to do.
Yeah.
Does it need to, is there a way for Bitcoin and the US dollar to exist in the same world? I think so. But do I think that cryptocurrencies are in fact currencies? Yes, I do. They're means of exchanging wealth and, better ones than we've ever had before. And that actually gets into, discussion of, where is Bitcoin going in price? Like, because a lot of times when people have conversations around that, they're like, okay, well, what's the market cap of gold? Well,
Yeah.
Bitcoin could possibly absorb 50% of the market cap of gold. Divide that by the amount of Bitcoin in existence, and you have like the max price on Bitcoin. So when you look at it that way, I mean, that's still a substantial number. However, when you look at it as, well, what is the total amount of currency that exists in the world, and what percentage of that can Bitcoin or crypto absorb? Well, that becomes a much higher number.
Yeah.
And believing that is the use case for cryptocurrencies is why I decided to go full time in this industry. Really, COVID was the spark for me. Seeing the massive inflation that was happening to stimulate the economy, for to try and keep things together during these troubled times that we had recently. Um, yeah, I mean, inflation has been the harbinger of doom for every civilization since the dawn of history, and even Ray Dalio has a a kind of a docu short out talking about this exact thing.
Yeah.
And as this massive inflation is occurring, here I am, day trading this asset or currency, whatever you want to call it. That is the first thing in existence in the entirety of history that has a truly fixed supply. And that
Yeah.
was very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's really the first time in history where humans can't tinker with the supply.
Yeah, and that's what's really important about it is removing the discretion of one person or a small group of people over it, because you might have a wise and scrupulous leader or a wise and scrupulous leadership group for a period of time overlooking the controls of a currency and a civilization. However, over a number of years, we're humans. We make mistakes, especially
Yeah.
when you're counting on one person or a group of people who have the choice in front of them of, well, we have to fight this war, and if we're going to fight this war, we have to pay for it. If we're going to pay for it, we have one of two choices. We can either tax the people more, which they're going to resist and not going to be happy about, or we can inflate the currency. And when you give the people the option to choose to inflate the currency, they will inflate it. That changes the core value structure around how our society functions, because
Yeah.
we need to be able to exchange currency for food in order to exist. And when you mess up that core value structure, everything falls apart. With Bitcoin, it's the first truly democratic way to create the rules surrounding how a currency works. And this was actually already proven and tested in the block size wars of 2017 and 2018 in China, when there was a small group of people who were trying to enforce their opinion on how the protocol would work in a way that would centralize control over the network. And despite the fact that the majority of miners, were voting for this because it would increase their profits, the node operators, which, anybody who has a computer from, 1990 with, virtually no technical skill at all can run a node and vote on the progress of the network. These node operators actually, resisted this incentive that would, reduce the decentralized and democratic nature of the currency against the powerful wishes of the miners at the time. And that is, really a mind-blowing thing, just because, there's been nothing like it before. So,
Yeah.
it's already been tested to truly allow the people to, as a group, enforce their beliefs on what should and shouldn't be happening.
So how would you explain that to someone who is maybe even a generation older than you and me, like maybe our parents, who don't really have that technical background or understanding? Like, I feel already a bit challenged when I go down the Bitcoin or the crypto rabbit hole. So how would you explain it to them? I mean, they already have their technical issues probably with their iPhones, So how do they wrap their head around those?
The technology allows us to have a true vote on what happens with the currency.
Yeah.
Your vote actually matters.
So why we don't have anything similar currently? Like in the current monetary system, we have like zero vote. I mean, the entire supply that was printed like in the last 18 to 24 months, at least none of us had a direct vote in that. It was just like kind of poured up on us and then kind of airdropped.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Yeah, there's lots of people that supported that, but I also know a lot of people who were really unhappy about the stimulus spending for the reason that, we knew that eventually somebody has to pay the bill, and that person is going to be us, because, the cost of things is going to go up, but is our salaries going to go up by that equal amount? I don't know.
Yeah, and they usually don't. And at the same time, we kind of
Exactly.
taxed the entire world. Anybody who holds a dollar got taxed on this. It's like almost not only on us, it was like almost a global tax.
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle that I don't hear enough people talk about. We kind of, as a country, pulled the rug out from the entire rest of the world that owns reserves, and holds them on their books, because we just devalued all of those reserves and stimulated us without stimulating them. And I'm sure there's got to be a lot of countries that really aren't happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, probably basically anybody holds large amounts of US dollar. Right? So what made you move into the crypto mining space? And maybe you can explain to us what that means, because, we're here more from a real estate kind of syndicator perspective. I mean, we understand cash flow and those kind of things, but maybe you can explain to us what it means to mine Bitcoin and what made you move into that space.
Yeah, so two questions there. First I'll address, what made me move into the space. What made me move into the space was, I've been looking into this on and off for the past decade. It was really, kind of an unstable, questionable thing for a long time. But again, with the inflation that was happening because of COVID, I knew that people all over the world were going to feel the effects of that, not be happy, and look for a better system. And, Bitcoin is here, this better system that's just waiting for people to find. So I knew that a lot of people were going to be turning to the world of crypto, and that would probably be a good time to enter the market. And secondly, I just looked at, my own personal skill sets with, experience in business, experience in IT, and experience in, like industrial and factories, because, that's what the Bitcoin mine is. It's basically a Bitcoin factory.
Yeah.
And I, just looked at myself and said that, I have the skill sets to make this thing happen. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
So what does Bitcoin mining mean? So the network requires data centers to process the transactions that people send on the network. And for the service of providing this computational power to the network pays you in Bitcoin.
I mean, it's capped at 21 million. And right now, the reward is basically receiving those Bitcoins. But what happens when we reach the cap? How does those miners get rewarded?
Yeah, so there's two ways that the miners are rewarded in Bitcoin mining. One is the block reward, which gets cut in half every 4 years to make sure that we never go over 21 million. We only get, infinitely closer to approaching it.
Yeah.
And secondly, each transaction that's sent on the network does require a processing fee, which is much smaller than a credit card transaction and settles much faster. But there is a fee associated with that. So
Yeah.
the more people that use the network, the more fee pool there is available for miners to be compensated with. So it's kind of like as block reward goes down and adoption increases, mining still stays relatively equally profitable.
So, which means that even once we get infinitely close to 21 million, at that point, there will be enough reward for the miners to kind of keep the network running.
Exactly.
And when we look at the energy consumption, I mean, we're all aware of the headlines this is making. Elon Musk made a statement on that, kind of pulling some of the Tesla investment in Bitcoin back because he was concerned about kind of the environmental compliance. But what's your take on that? I mean, it's really energy intensive, and I mean there are many places in the world where it's not profitable to mine Bitcoin because of the energy prices. But kind of how do you mitigate that as someone who's setting up a Bitcoin mining facility?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question because this is something that I'm very passionate about. I mean, I am somebody who falls in line with, we should be producing energy from renewable sources as much as we can. We should reduce the amount of chemicals that we're putting into the environment, all that sort of thing. However, the tagline for our conference last year was something that I came up with, and it was hashtag energy well spent.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I look at this is, you know, uh, you know, I don't know, too many people here probably don't know much about metal manufacturing. But if you smelting aluminum or melting a pot of steel to cast it into objects basically involves sending a constant lightning bolt of energy into a giant cauldron to melt steel, and it's like like the most energy intensive thing in the world. This is actually why a lot of Bitcoin mines are built in ex aluminum smelting plants. And so we spend all this energy to make this really great hard material that allows us to build skyscrapers hundreds of stories into the sky. And now just imagine creating a currency that is just as hard as that steel, unlike any currency that's ever been made before,
Yeah.
that could actually stabilize our global financial and political system. Is that energy that's worth spending on? And my answer to that is yes, it absolutely is. The whole argument about the energy consumption of Bitcoin, like literally Christmas lights in the United States use more energy than Bitcoin. Okay, and even if it overtakes that, why are we not asking the data center industry how much energy it's consuming? Why are we not asking people how far they're driving to work every day? It's kind of a ridiculous argument.
Well, I think there are discussions around those things, and there are definitely companies who are trying to get in charge of their energy spend on centers. But I think the average person is not aware that every single Google search they take consumes energy. Like that's stuff we don't think about, like how all of those devices and what's in the back end, the surges. I mean, they run on servers, but that's like less in the public domain. So why do you think there's such a big debate about the energy part of Bitcoin?
Great question. I think it stems from people who feel the power structures that support their position being disrupted. And it's pretty much the only angle left that you can attack Bitcoin on and try to push people into things that don't involve proof of work, because these other cryptos that Ethereum is moving to proof of stake, for example. Proof of stake removes the fundamental thing that makes crypto secure, which is mining, which consumes energy, because the game theory that forces everybody in the ecosystem to be an honest actor. Okay, and this is something that we can really go deep down the rabbit hole on, but I'm going to keep it not like that. But the game theory that forces everybody in the system to be an honest actor surrounds there being a real world cost to participating in the system. And that real world cost is electricity. So when you remove that, it removes the foundation on which everything rests, and basically makes it the same as whoever has the most wealth dominates everything. And if you are somebody who wants the system to be designed such that whoever has the most wealth dominates everything because you have the most wealth, then of course you would want people to use the systems which allow you to have that power. And
Yep.
the only way to push people into those systems is to talk about how terrible Bitcoin is for the environment.
Yeah. So then, Kevin O'Leary speaks about setting up Bitcoin mining in Texas himself, and he's very concerned about it to be ESG compliant because he's also part of a public traded company, and he wants to make sure that every Bitcoin is mined off solar power or at least sustainable power, and they hold it themselves. Do you think that's a crucial piece to the puzzle, to the value of those Bitcoins being mined more sustainably over maybe it being mined in China? China?
Okay, so for one, Bitcoin that's mined completely sustainably using wind and solar does not exist because Bitcoin is mined 24 hours around the clock, and wind and solar only work when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining. Um, do I think that
So how about battery usage?
battery usage changes the economics of it such that it's not profitable anymore because of the cost of installing the batteries. Not to mention that that's not environmentally friendly either. I don't know how much people know about the effects on the earth of mining lithium, but it's one of the nastiest things that we do. Man, this was a really tough thing for me to come to grips with because, like I said, I am an environmentally conscious and minded person. But renewables make it even more difficult than it already is, which is extremely difficult to maintain the grids that we all use every day to turn our lights on. Now, do I think that I mean, me personally, I'm choosing to build my mining farm in a location that's surrounded by gigawatts of wind energy, specifically for the reason that when the wind is blowing,
Yeah.
my energy is 100% renewable. But there's still another 55% of the time that the energy has to come from something like
Yeah.
gas, coal, or nuclear. And like I said, it's good to do those things as much as we can, but at the same time, we have to be honest and practical about the fact that there is not going to be a time that wind and solar can completely supply the grid or Bitcoin mining.
So if you had somebody that asks you, how does the mining process work? Like, let's say again, maybe our parents are in the picture and they ask you, what are you actually doing there when you say mining? How does that process work? Okay, there's some computer technology and there's a lot of energy involved. But if you were to explain it to them, what would that look like?
You're running computers that are checking the ledger of transactions at all times, verifying that it complies with the rules of the network, and publishing the updated status of that ledger to the world.
Okay.
So it's a warehouse filled with computers with half a power plant worth of energy plugged into them.
Can you use the excess heat for anything?
You can, yes, yes. That's one of the frontiers in the industry. Yeah, I mean personally, I've chosen to mine in Texas because mining in a location where the political climate is friendly to you is very very important to the stability and longevity of your operation. However, so in the U.S., kind of the other places where there's cheap energy are Washington and New York. And those places have not been so friendly to us.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking internationally, you have people who, this is a kind of, I guess, an interesting bit of information. I'm fascinated by this sort of thing. But deep in the north and the south, in the coldest climates on Earth, cities will heat the city using a central location where the water is heated and then distributed through radiators throughout the town. And people are
Yeah.
actually preheating that water with Bitcoin mining. Drying any kind of product for combustion or anything else that needs to be dried, heating fish farms. Yeah, there's a lot of really great uses for the rejected heat. We're working on one of them to purify water in Texas. Texas has a big need for the purification of certain water due to drilling. So yeah,
But
yeah, that's
how does the heat contribute to purifying water? You mean through evaporation?
yeah, yes.
Okay. Okay. I mean, those are really interesting use cases. So basically, I mean, the same has been done in other industry where the excess heat has been used effectively for different things. But I guess it just gives it another layer of use cases that helps to make it sustainable or at least, more economic.
Yeah, absolutely. You
So,
know,
when it comes to the regulatory environment, you said you're going to Texas because they're more business friendly, and in fact, the same is true for real estate. There is a reason, so many of the syndicators appreciate Texas or the Sun Belt because it is a more business friendly environment overall. But what is happening in Texas that allows you to do that and gives you probably the foundation to actually take a move that is, for example, not existent somewhere in the north, like you mentioned New York not being too friendly to you?
I would say that first and foremost, it has to do with the ideals of self-sovereignty and autonomy aligning with the ideals that go along with Bitcoin, which is, having personal control over your money that no bank, no authority can take away from you. That's kind of like very much like falls in line with like Texan sentiments. So there's that piece of it. And then the other piece is that it's a very, very energy rich state, with the massive reserves of oil. It's very windy. There's lots of sunshine. So you're just, have all sorts of opportunities for producing energy. And,
Yeah.
their grid doesn't connect to the rest of the country. So you have all this energy that, is basically has nowhere to go. And you could build, 3 times as much if you wanted to, if there was a use for it, which there is now because of Bitcoin mining. And also really interestingly, California ran into this problem when they tried to create their own independent system operator, which is a way of structuring and managing the way the electricity flows to the grid. Because California, as we all know, is very very environmentally progressive, I'll say. And you heard me mention earlier that these renewable energy sources create all sorts of problems for trying to manage the way the energy is distributed to the grid. But the
Yeah.
thing with Bitcoin mining is that it's, unlike pretty much any other industry that came before, for the reason that, we can turn off and turn on at any time, our one mine, and the rest of the network doesn't care. So what that means is that as these renewables are coming online and offline, and the way the electricity is flowing through that grid is fluctuating, we can match our energy consumption to regulate the grid and stabilize it so that we can have those renewables online and pushing energy into the grid
Yeah.
without messing everything up. And so because Texas does have so many renewables there, the combination of the social inclinations being in line with Bitcoin ethos, and the quantity and type of energy production there, it just kind of makes it the perfect place to be.
So if I got that right, so basically you are able to build more sustainable energy production like solar panels because with the mining you can actually use the peaks when people don't use it. Like for example, when everybody wakes up in the morning, there's a peak in energy consumption because suddenly everybody makes themselves coffee, turn on the radio, and all those kind of peaks that kind of establish in the morning. And in order to have that peak covered by actual sustainable sources, you could use Bitcoin mining to make them more economic throughout the rest of the day when the energy isn't used. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to, make sure I understand it and that the audience
Yeah.
gets like a second line of thought on what you're saying. Because so that's a use case that I've also heard Michael Saylor speak about, where you basically now can effectively use different sources of energy in places where it never made sense before. And one of the use cases he talked about is that you could basically put a mining facility anywhere in, for example, Central Africa, and it would provide, as a side product to the villages, it would provide energy to the village while it would actually generate income at the same time. But then I guess there the question is who is financing that upfront?
Yeah, that is the big question. There is some concern in the community around the cost of entry being so high to mining with the industrialization around it, because kind of the whole Bitcoin ethos is decentralization, and everybody can participate, everybody has an equal vote, that kind of thing. But still everybody can run a node, and anybody who holds Bitcoin should be running a node, because it's your own personal authentication of the status of the network, that also gives you a vote. So long as everybody has that vote while they're mining, has this high financial barrier to entry or not, then you can still know that the democratic status of the network and your wealth that you have stored in Bitcoin is secure because you have that vote.
So when you speak about security, I think this is an interesting part of it, because for people who are not so tech savvy, the whole thing doesn't sound secure at all. Like the fact that it just can be lost in a single digit transaction error and it's completely gone in cyberspace doesn't make it look super secure. So maybe you can touch up on that. Like, what does it mean for a private person to run a node? In the initial stage when Bitcoin was launched, it was run on normal computers, and then they kind of went from CPUs to GPUs, and that now they have like hardware that's perfectly designed just to run Bitcoin, where it's like hard coded into it. So, which also kind of adds to the high entry level now, because it's like highly sophisticated. It went from being run on a computer. But how does someone who is just getting into it understand the security component? And then also, like, how would I run my own node? Would I just run that on my computer?
Yeah, so there's a lot of guides you can find on the internet that make it very easy without actually understanding like the code that goes into it behind it. Like you don't need to be a software developer to run a node at all. You don't even um, I mean, just with very basic computer skills, you can do that. I talk about the node thing because I'm an enthusiast. But the most important thing on a personal level from a security standpoint is, well, I mean, to tie back to what you were saying about how the single digit transaction error. With great power comes great responsibility. So if you mess up and you send the Bitcoin to the wrong place, or if you lose your seed phrase, which is your password that allows you to recover your Bitcoin, well, then it's over for you. But so long as you can manage to not do one of those two things, you have, unlike anything before, something that cannot physically be taken away from you because it's not physical. Your gold, your real estate, your bank account, whether the government, is in a time of crisis and needs your money for the war, or whether you have a bad actor who comes into your home and steals your floor safe. Those things are possible with physical assets, but with Bitcoin and a password that's remembered in your head, or even distributed across the world.
That doesn't sound very safe to most people, I bet.
There's very good ways to get around that, such as needing multiple passwords from around the world to be activated at the same time to move the Bitcoin. So if you're storing 7, 8, 9, 10 figures worth of Bitcoin, having for example a group of 7 people where 5 people all need to put in the password at the same time in order to move the Bitcoin is probably the most secure system that's ever been invented that's accessible to a normal person.
What happens if one person dies?
That's why it's only 5 out of 7.
Oh, okay. Oh, 5 out of 7. Okay, got it. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, but maybe people don't even want that level of responsibility. Like if I look at the average person in society, I think they're perfectly happy that the money is at the bank and that they feel like a sense of safety, because I think most people are not comfortable sleeping on their life savings. So for them to have like a private cold wallet at home, that sounds probably super intimidating.
Yeah, you make a great point. I have that radical self-sufficiency thing that I'm all about. But there's lots of great services in the world for people who feel that way. Who will secure and store the Bitcoin for you, so that as the world begins to learn how to use this new, better money, and the value of it appreciates, you can have exposure to that appreciating value without needing to have the responsibility of securing and storing it yourself. So I mean, River Financial, Casa, even Kraken or Coinbase exchanges, are ways that you can do that.
Yeah, so today I just read that Coinbase, if the company itself were to go bankrupt, there is a potential case where some of the crypto assets get lost in the bankruptcy.
And that is why it's important to hold your own Bitcoin, hold your own keys, and take on that personal responsibility. Because in our lifetimes, people our age, you think that like this bank thing and everything is very secure and safe, but there's been times even in, United States history when, you tried to go to the bank and exchange your money for your gold that it's supposed to be worth and you couldn't get it. And there's been times where they've just decided to print 100% more dollars, and all of a sudden your money is devaluing at, probably 20 or 30% a year, not the official 8%. So when, you're exposed to those kinds of risks by, utilizing these third-party services, then, you start to understand why it's important to take that responsibility upon yourself. However, there are services that aren't exchanges that will hold your coin securely for you, such as River Financial or CASA, CASA, if anybody wants to look.
So what differentiates them from, for example, Coinbase? Like, how do they hold it safe without having this similar setup where it might get lost?
The same thing I was talking about before, where multiple people have to put in the password at the same
Okay.
time to move it. So if, you and your wife, or, you and a close family member, a close friend or whatever, both have access to two of those keys, and, it requires, X amount of keys to move Bitcoin, then nobody can move it against your will. And also nobody can force you to give you access to your key in order to move the Bitcoin, because you can't physically move it by yourself. So it pretty much prevents the most avenues of attack on your wealth.
I can still kind of underlyingly hear you talking about Bitcoin being a currency. What would you tell people that see the volatility? Like right now, we're around $30,000. We've moved all the way down from above 70. So there has been like that big change in value, which kind of prohibits it to be my day-to-day monetary money, because that sounds like even more scary than the inflation we're facing. Because if I'm not even sure if my money drops by 75% in value by next year, I mean that's like things we've seen in Venezuela, where people are trying to get out of the currency because they're really seeing that kind of inflation where the value just completely disappears of their money.
Yeah, I mean that's an effect of the infancy of the protocol, because things are valued in dollars still, and because the world is still kind of trying to figure out where this thing fits in, from day to day. There's these swings, but in the long term, in 10, 25, 50 years, when things are valued and how many Bitcoin is it worth, then it'll stabilize, because the value of the dollar fluctuates too,
Yeah.
just not that much. And I would
Yeah, not
argue
that
that
dramatically. I mean, we don't really see like a 70% shift in a couple of months.
yeah, but as time goes on, it will stabilize, just like any mature market.
Yeah, I mean, I think now we're at a stage. We've seen Fidelity kind of wanting to open it up to 401ks. We've seen some of the Arab sovereign wealth funds thinking about allocating small percentages. And the interesting thing is, once those kind of funds start allocating, we're talking about maybe 1 to 3% of their portfolio, but at the same time, we're talking about billions. And if we talk globally, trillions of dollars that are moving into the space. So that will probably not only push the price, but at the same time stabilize a lot more than the retail buyer, because I mean, a retail is in and out, and they really fluctuate with the kind of the overall sentiment of the market. But I guess those hardcore investors, they will put their money for a long-term horizon, which will stabilize everything.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We're at, under 1 trillion in market cap in Bitcoin right now. And if you look at, just in the next few years, say, a few trillion globally pouring into it, I mean, that's, however many trillions enter the market is however many 2, 3, 4, 5x, we get in price. And that's kind of, one of the argument that I have to the volatility, not necessarily in the currency sense, but in the how good of an investment it is sense, is that, if your time horizon is 6 months or 1 year, sure, you can find times when, you might have experienced a 50 or 60% drawdown in Bitcoin. But if your time horizon is 4 years, then you cannot find a time in the history of Bitcoin that it has not outperformed every single asset class in existence.
Yeah, well, but it's only a decade old, and it's seen a faster adoption than the internet itself. So, which is also very unique in the history of anything on the world. But obviously, there's a cap to that. I think right now we're still on less than 500 million people who are actually in the crypto space. So obviously there's still large potential for global adoption, but if it keeps pace, that will be over rather soon. Like if we keep the level of adoption that we've seen in the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The time is now. I remember, reading or listening to, a financial business podcast of some sort, where what was being spoken about was, the time to enter emerging industries. And it's kind of like, right when you want to enter is like not on the very beginning when this thing is like, in like PhD studies, and not like once you've already experienced all the upside, but kind of in the in-between time when it's just right about to go off, because that's when there's still a lot of upside left, but risk is mitigated. And I kind of feel like that's where we are in Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're past like the nerd stage, the very early adopters, the
Yeah.
techies. We've seen some significant adoption, I would say, over the last 4 to 5 years from also funds and, larger use cases. And now we're probably still in the early adoption of like the big kind of the middle chunk of the curve. So there's
Yeah, I
there
agree completely.
still a lot of meat here on the bone.
Because it gives people access to financial systems, ability to store and transmit wealth who did not have access to it before, it actually increases global GDP, which I don't know if that's something that everybody who's listening to this knows, is that there's a lot of people in the world who don't have access to banks, they don't have access to stable ways to store their wealth, and they don't have access to good ways to transmit wealth. That is a thing that exists, and this solves that problem, which gives those
Yeah.
people the ability to do business, which increases the global economic output of the world. And further to that, I mean, it does take 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the level of security you want, for a Bitcoin transaction to settle. But that's still, roughly 1% of the time of a bank wire. So by decreasing the amount of time it takes for value to be transmitted and increasing the amount of people who have access to the transmission of that value, it
Yeah.
increases global economic output drastically. So when we talk about like what percentage of the market cap of currencies can cryptocurrency soak up, well, it actually increases that total available pool to draw from,
Yeah.
while doing a service for the world, giving these undeveloped countries access to something that they didn't have before, as well as everybody else in the world in addition.
I think there's also a use case that I've heard about that. For example, in African countries, historically, whenever there was a new power in place, they just kind of threw out the old property books and, kind of like, okay, now this property belongs to my buddies. And and now there are no records anymore who owned this maybe 25 years ago or even 5 years ago. But if that property would be, for example, dedicated on a blockchain, it's like it would be immutable no matter who's in power, at least as long as people can prove like, hey, this used to be my family's land. And so I think there are many use cases where now people that historically haven't been served in holding their own assets, from property itself to being underbanked. And I think that's one of the reasons Jack Dorsey is so involved in the space, because he really wants to build out that part of it, that where people are being part of the global economy, the internet economy, and having ownership of their own assets and having those kind of services available to them. I mean, technically, anybody with a phone today can participate in the global economy and kind of become self-sufficient, which is something we've never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, as a currency or an asset, in my mind, there is only Bitcoin. But as far as other use cases for blockchain technology, recording titles, medical records, forcing honesty in politics, recording history that is, written by, whoever the author is, as opposed to only the victor, are all, yeah, really great use cases that I'm looking forward to seeing new companies develop.
So how do you see that apply to the real estate space? I mean, we have tokenization of real estate in the infancy still. There are people who try to do it even in New York already with apartments, and we're like different models. So people are looking at the legal space right now because it still all has to be SEC compliant. So usually there are custodians around that. But how do you see that apply to larger real estate investments?
Yeah, so from the investment standpoint, with the tokenization of securities, So, what's meant by that is, on an alternate blockchain that's, not Bitcoin, I'm creating these tokens that represent a certain amount of the stake in security. And so the benefit to doing this is it makes them more easily tradable, and creates secondary markets where, after that, your lockup period that you have for, your securities, it just increases the available market for people to trade them and to be able to enter and exit investments, which creates more value for investors. Um,
Yep.
Additionally to that, with this immutable record that you're talking about existing on blockchains, things like title insurance, title companies are going to be out of business within the next decade.
So basically,
Because
a lot of like third-party verification companies become obsolete.
absolutely, they'll be replaced by software developers.
Well, this has been super, super interesting, Taylor. So one of the questions I like to ask, what does living a wealthy life means to you? Because, this is the path to wealth. What does your wealthy life look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question because, after we spoke initially and then I saw the name of your podcast written in writing, I was like, oh, this is something that I'm going to be, really interested in because I'm very big on, living a holistic, fulfilled, wealthy life, both in terms of, material wealth, but also intellectual and, social wealth. Living a wealthy life to me, means living with intention. Find a way to be passionate about the things that you do. I think that complacency is the death of wealth. And I think that taking the time to practice meditation is probably the single best thing that a person can do for their life for only 5 or 10 minutes a day because I just imagine it as like doing push-ups for my mind.
Yeah.
But in the most calming way possible. And just 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, it really leads you to cultivate that personal and intellectual wealth that then spreads out into the rest of the world to help you gain that material and social wealth as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I think
Thank you. Thank you.
like meditation is a big part, and I think it's truly a foundation of living a good life. Like, and it doesn't need to be a formal meditation, but some kinds of zoning in. Like, it could be maybe a walk in nature, but having that practice of like reconnecting is so important for a life well lived. I would fully agree. So, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me, at my email, Taylor at solomondata.systems. That's, Solomon like King Solomon. Check out theminingconference.com. Or if you want to reach out to me on Telegram, my Telegram handle is AMARCHI17.
We've never had anybody share that Telegram handle, so this is definitely a different kind of episode. So thank you so much for your time and sharing this completely new perspective on an asset class that we haven't really explored here at all. And yeah, best of luck with setting up your mining operations in Texas.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. I always enjoy sharing information that allows people to access this thing that is improving lives all over the world.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.